I guess what we'll do, why don't we get started, right? It's a cozy group this time. It's getting a little smaller. I've been chasing people away, but welcome to the third group of People's Economics. This is sort of a three-part series that I've been doing here to try and just talk about some economic issues and get some of this put onto tape for future reference, so we have it available in the world. I'm just waiting for the, go back to the screen. Just waiting for it. If you remember where we left off last time, we've talked about sort of taking the long view. I always try to take the long view in just about everything that I do. Just go ahead, space back here when I wave my hand like this. Okay, just 1 second. All right, and last time we talked a little bit about work. This is more about high finance, and I have a different take on that, as you can well imagine. The long view, this is something that I didn't actually get into last time, but I thought it was kind of handy. This is the wisdom of King Solomon as recorded in Ecclesiastes chapter 3. If the song comes to your mind, that's kind of intentional, because 50 years ago today, that song by the Byrds, Turn, 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 by Pete Seeger originally, was the #1 hit in the United States 50 years ago today. Okay? And there's a reason why I know that. But that was kind of how we started out with the long view and thinking about things. But as we got into the nature of work, one other thing became pretty obvious to us. Sorry, more technical issues. Something went terribly wrong in the 1970s, if we all remember. And exactly what is something that economists have been debating for a long time. And this is an example of some of the things that went terribly wrong in the 70s. If you lived through it and you remember this, I guess as Robin Williams always said, if you remember it, you weren't there. But exactly what went wrong in the 70s is a really big question, because we all know that a lot of different things happened at that time. If you remember, I talked about that as the economic summer period, the long languid period. Of course, not everything was bad in the 70s. I just had to include a picture of Jim Rocker, just so that we didn't get too bad of a feeling about it. Because this was my childhood, I had to remember it somehow. But before we talk about high finance, I want to talk about sort of the nature of an economic system, because in a certain sense, it's like a big jet airplane. There are a lot of complicated moving parts, and it's a very complex system that very few people understand. But for things to go terribly wrong, there are multiple backups and things that check on each other. If something's going to go terribly kaflooey with the whole system, you usually have to have 3 or 4 things happen simultaneously. We know from where we're standing right now that some things went terribly, terribly wrong. And I want to piece together 3 things that I think went just completely kaflooey on us, and things that could go wrong again and will continue to in the future. So the first thing we got to start with is the modern economic world as we know it. This is a picture of the Bretton Woods Conference. It was at a resort in New Hampshire. This was a month after D-Day. The troops were on the ground still trying to figure out how to win the war, when all the economists from all the developed capitalist nations, the Soviet Union is not included, got together in a resort in New Hampshire and tried to figure out how to win the peace. They set up the economic system that was going to rule the world whenever the war finally ended and everybody won and was happy and all that. And one of the things they agreed to, and the British weren't happy about this, but they had to agree, was that after the war, there would be a standard all around the world based on the US dollar. The US dollar would be backed by gold, and everything would be done in US dollars. That came out of the Bretton Woods Conference in 1944, July 1944. And it's very, very important, because that is what set up the modern world. If you'll remember, I said before that we just entered sort of the post-war period finally. Well, we still have this relic from the post-war period that we have to deal with, and that's where it gets kind of interesting. The world is ruled by dollars. 85% of all world trade is done in dollars. If Brazil sells iron ore to China, it's priced in dollars. Okay? It's not just stuff going back and forth in this country. And for that reason, countries all around the world have to maintain reserves in dollars. They typically maintain about 4 months, 3 to 4 months of reserves in dollars in order to have the cash on hand in case something goes terribly wrong. One of the things they do is government debt, or treasury bills as we call them, are very, very similar to dollars. They're highly convertible. You can get dollars out of them at any moment based on the full faith and credit of the United States. The difference is that treasury bills bear interest. So governments, central banks all around the world like to carry a certain amount of our debt. That's why it's so easy to finance debt. When people talk about China owning $5 trillion of US debt, yes, they do. They don't want to. That's about 3 months of trade back and forth between China. And the central bank is more or less forced to hold that much just to cover the debts that they can logically see themselves occurring. But something weird happened. Yeah, things just went wrong in the 70s, didn't they? In 1971, President Nixon took us off the gold standard. And the whole world looked around and said, wow, the agreement from the Bretton Woods conference is broken. What are we going to do? I mean, the dollar is no longer backed by gold. So what everybody around the world did is pretty much what they do at every financial crisis. Nothing. Well, I guess we're going to keep taking dollars. But it's an important point from that forward because the United States had the ability to print whatever money it wanted to. Okay? We're no longer bound by gold. We're no longer constricted in what we have to worry about. And so we can just keep printing dollars whenever we do whatever we want with them. It sets up what is generally known as a currency war. It's not a shooting war, it's a kind of cold war, except it gets a little hot at times. Basically, if you're a nation, let's say you're the nation of, what was it, Grand Fenwick and the Mouse That Roared, and you want to make your exports cheaper for the rest of the world, what you want to do is to trash your currency. Print as much of it as possible and lower the value of it, so that way everything coming out of Grand Fenwick is a lot cheaper than it used to be. It's kind of weird if you think about it. A currency war, the goal is to trash your currency, but that's the way it works. The problem that we have in the United States is that we really can't trash our currency. The whole world depends on it. The whole world is counting on it. So every other nation can make their currency worth less with respect to the US dollar, but there's only so much that we can do because everything is priced in US dollars. We can't change the price of our products in US dollars. And this is where it starts to get really interesting, especially fast forward from the 1970s. This is a picture of a cargo container, a 20-foot equivalent unit, or TEU. It's 20 feet by 10 feet by 8 feet. The whole world, 90% of world cargo, you thought 85% was impressive in dollars, 95% of world trade that's not oil goes in one of these boxes. It's a topic in and of itself. Everybody talks about the glory of the internet connecting people and being able to shovel money back and forth. Well, if you're going to have to exchange goods, this is what you do in it. And by the way, to ship one of these from Shanghai, China to Amsterdam only costs $850 right now. Okay? You fill this box with whatever you want, doesn't matter. You fill it full of Nikes, and the net cost for each one of those Nikes is pennies. Just pennies. And when you ship that container from Shanghai to Amsterdam, the price of everything is in US dollars. Right? So it's one of those weird standards that brought the whole world together that makes globalism possible. But a big part of it is this weird thing which we call the dollar standard. Now, this is a picture of the current account, which is to say our trade deficit. A positive number is a surplus, a negative number is a deficit. Since 1970, I picked 1970 because that's when we have good numbers. It's all expressed as a share of gross domestic product, so it's normalized. As the economy grows, you can see it relatively go up and down. As I said, positive numbers are a trade surplus. Yeah, we don't have too many of those. The black line is 0. We have been running a trade deficit more or less constantly since about 1974. Remember I said something went wrong in 1974? 71, we went off the gold standard. At some point there, we started, the world hunger for dollars started accelerating. The more world trade there is, the more demand there is for dollars, the more the value of the dollar keeps up, and the more expensive our products are, the more difficult it is for us to export. When we were talking about jobs, I didn't say much about globalism as an effect because I don't think it's the fault of the workers. I don't think globalism is all about us competing with India per se. I think it's all about currency effects. And you can see it. And we'll get into this a little bit more later. But you can see that we ran a terrible trade deficit right up until the big crash. The dollar became more and more valuable because there was more and more world trade, more and more demand for dollars. By supply and demand, the value of the dollar went up. And goods priced in US dollars coming out of manufacturing plants in Ohio and places like that just had no business going anywhere in the world. In fact, China started eating our lunch because you could manufacture things in China for practically no money compared to what it cost in Ohio. The dollar was king. And that's problem number one that we had to deal with. The second thing that happened is something called the Black-Scholes-Merton equation. I wanted to show you a blackboard full of a whole bunch of scribbles with derivatives and things like that. The Black-Scholes-Merton equation, Black and Scholes were two economists who formulated this in the 1970s, interestingly enough. They didn't win their Nobel Prize until 1997. But it's the basic idea that if you have an investment and you properly hedge or insure that investment, that you can set up a system where you can have a guaranteed return that is risk-free, that there is no risk of it failing. Because what you do, for example, is you loan somebody money, and they owe you that money, they pay a regular interest rate on that money, and then you insure it. As long as the insurance costs less than what your income is, then the worst thing that can happen is you collect on the insurance, and whatever money you have coming in from that investment, less the cost of the insurance, is absolutely risk-free. The Black-Scholes-Merton equation changed the nature of investing because from the 1970s on, people started getting more and more interested in risk-free investing. Now, the nature of that insurance is the funny part of it all. Because it's not exactly insurance as the way you might think it is. It's what we call derivatives, or things that financial instruments that are not directly related to the item that they are underlying, but the trading of it. Credit default swaps are the most common forms of it. A credit default swap is a bet that a loan is going to fail. And where it gets interesting is you can logically see that if I loaned money to somebody, I would take out a piece of insurance that that loan might fail. But other people can buy them too. Other people can bet that that loan might fail. For example, somebody down the block from me could take one look at my house and say, I bet he's not going to pay the mortgage this month. I'm going to go bet on that. I'm going to go take out something that pays off if he defaults on his loan. You can do that. It's legal. It's not betting. It's not like playing the lottery or whatever. And this is a graph of credit default swaps, primarily being derivatives. And the scale over here is really hard to read because it starts at $100 trillion. And it accelerates up to about $700 trillion. This is the total global value of assets that are underwritten by derivatives at this point. Most of them, about 80–85%, are credit default swaps. $700 trillion. The entire product of this planet is about $50 trillion. Okay? So this is about 14 years of global production is insured, in quotes, in these bets, which are nothing more than bets. Okay? And it all came out of the idea of the Black-Scholes-Merton equation. You can see it gradually goes up and peaks somewhere in here. This is 2008. Remember how much fun we had in 2008? It's leveled off, but it hasn't gone down. It all comes from the idea that the market can sell insurance-like products that make it so that there is no risk anywhere in the world. Unless, of course, you want to take these credit default swaps and start playing them like a casino. But the whole mentality is that we're going to do all these things risk-free, and that's where it gets particularly fascinating. The next problem that we have is the expansion of credit. Now, I don't know about you, but I get all kinds of credit card invitations in the mail all the time, which is fascinating because my credit's terrible. I'm just going to say that. Why do we have so many credit card options available? Because there's always somebody willing to give us credit somewhere. And you might think that more credit is never a bad thing. I mean, right? You always have some more credit available. If you've ever been in trouble with it, maybe you have a different opinion, and that's good. Because something strange happens when you look at it through the whole economy. Okay? This is a graph of what's called credit capacity. And it's basically the total outstanding credit available in the United States to private sources, primarily consumers. It's mostly consumers, but there's a little bit of industry in there, divided by the gross domestic product, so it evens out as a scale of the size of the economy. But you see that it keeps going up, and it crosses 100% sometime in 1985. Interesting paper that came out from the International Monetary Fund that said that somewhere between 80% and 100%, that is the total credit available in an economy, when it becomes between 80% and 100% of the size of that economy, that it has a net negative effect on the economy. And what it is that the economy becomes terribly, terribly tied to the financial industry. It's no longer efficient. Everybody has to report to where they're getting the credit from. Everything goes back to how much money you're making. And the net efficiency actually goes down, somewhere between 80 and 100%. We're at 160, 170%, at least we were. We've backed off to 150. But where we crossed that magic 80% line into 90% or so was in the 1970s. It's kind of interesting. See, that's the thing, when you look at people who want to talk about what went terribly wrong in the 1970s, there are three camps. One, too many workers in the economy, as we talked about last time. Two, people who say we went off the gold standard and we started printing currency like crazy. And three, people who said the expansion of credit got nuts. And those are basically the three different things that we have to worry about in all these. It's kind of a different world that we live in. This is a picture, this is Garth Williams' illustrations from Little House on the Prairie, because I always like to go back to Pa Ingalls. It's kind of nostalgic, isn't it? But you think about what you might have read in Little House on the Prairie when Pa Ingalls was getting ready for winter. You know, they'd salt away meat and have plenty of grain available and all that because they were ready. They built up inventory so that they would be able to survive. They had resiliency that was built into their system. Today, everything is a commodity. Everything is tradable because we're beholden to financial markets. Everything's based on those credit markets. This is what happens when you cross some magic line that the IMF estimates when your credit is basically the size of your economy, more or less, that everything becomes a commodity and you no longer have resiliency based in the system. Back in Pa Ingalls' day, you know, if they put away enough for the winter, they'd survive it, unless it was a particularly bad winter, but that's one of the books. Anyway, we had a different world. Today, everything is tightly integrated, and what holds it all together is the financial industry. And that's where it all gets kind of crazy. So we come up with three basic problems. Remember I said the economy is something like a jet airliner. If one thing breaks, it's not going to bring the plane down. But we have three things that have become really big problems for us. One is the dollar standard. The United States is the currency of choice. Our main export through all that time, when we ran these terrible trade deficits, our main export were little pieces of paper with green on the back. And we exchanged those for goods and services, and people all around the world wanted these little pieces of paper with green on them, and we just kept shoveling at them. Never mind the workers in Ohio, they don't need jobs. We'll just keep shoveling paper at it. And we could do that. But it destroyed our manufacturing base. We have 1/3 the number of workers in manufacturing now that we did in year 2000. Okay? Because our main export are little pieces of paper. The second problem is that traders now have come to believe that investments should be risk-free.
or they look at investment as if it is a risk-free kind of thing, because it is possible to hedge everything and insure it to the point where risk-free investment is technically a possibility. And by risk-free, as we all know, basically what they're doing is they're socializing the risk. They're spreading it through the market. They're no longer holding it personally. They're sending it out to everyone else. So when it all breaks, it all breaks. And that's what happened in 2008. It was the market that failed all at once because all that risk was socialized, thrown off to other people, supposedly calculated down to the last penny as to what it cost. No, it wasn't calculated properly. And the third problem we have is that credit is essentially unlimited. And you think about this as we go through. Unlimited credit, risk-free investing, and the US dollar can do whatever it wants. What's that a recipe for? Okay? What happens to the industry? Well, yeah, a plane crash, sure, that's one thing that can happen. I want to show you something scarier. This is Martin Shkreli. This is the guy who bought out a pharmaceutical company and raised the price of an AIDS drug from $13.50 to $750 because he figured he could. He's scarier than a jet airplane crash. I'm going to tell you, because he can kill more people. All right? The problem we have in the industry is that all this power and all this money is attracting the wrong people. They're in it for the power trips, for the ego. I didn't bring it up this time, but you remember the fabulous Fab who sold all those bonds that nobody knew anything about? Yeah. There are people like that all over the place. That's who makes up our financial industry, because it has that much power, that much unlimitedness. I call this people's economics because rather than talk about dollars and all this, I want to talk about people. When you talk about high finance, let's talk about the people that we're attracting to high finance at this point. Who is getting into it? The other weird effect, beyond just the people, and I wanted to show you this headline from Bloomberg. This is just from a little while ago. The other thing is that everything gets a little bit crazy because it's so big. You remember when, just today we raised interest rates 1/4 point at the Federal Reserve. You know, it's a big turning point. For the first time in a decade, interest rates have risen. But when interest rates were going down, something amazing happened. Because the idea was you lower interest rates, there's more money available for Americans, we borrow more money, we invest it back into things, and it gets the economy going again. You and I all know that it didn't work quite that way. Because the Federal Reserve lowered interest rates, and a lot of that money was borrowed in China. It didn't stay here. There's nothing holding it here. The world is on a dollar standard. There's nothing to stop it from going anywhere. Basically, if our interest rate is going down, we can reasonably expect that the value of the dollar is going to go down. And so you convert it to Chinese yuan as fast as you possibly can, where their interest rates were like 8% and ours were 0. All right? It's a pretty good deal. You borrow a bunch here because you can't borrow at home. And if you assume that the value of the dollar is only going to keep going down because the interest rates in America are going down, when it comes time to pay off that loan, it's going to be a lot easier. You're holding Chinese yuan. They're only appreciating in value. And yeah, you got some right back there. They still got pictures of Mao on it. He's been dead since '76. You know, they still do that.
It did go wrong in the 70s.
Something went wrong in the '70s. Mao died. That's the whole problem. Yeah. But if you're sure that the Chinese yuan is going to appreciate in value, then why not? It's going to get cheaper to pay off those loans. And as long as people were doing this, as long as people were taking money from American low interest rates and converting them to Chinese yuan as fast as they can and selling off those dollars, the value of the US dollar kept going down. It was an absolutely amazing thing. And then you take this money and you invest it in the Chinese stock market, because we all know the Chinese stock market is going nowhere but up. It goes up every single year, growing with the People's Republic of China as things get better. So it's kind of a twofer. You borrow money cheap, you expect the yuan to appreciate, and you put it in Chinese stocks. You're making money at both ends. It's an absolutely amazing deal. But this is where we have to go back to this. You see this part of the curve? This is when the dollar started becoming less valuable after 2008. This is when that carry trade really took off. And that's where it gets particularly interesting. Because the plan, once again, you borrow a lot of money, put it into the stock market, and you pay off less money in the end, and you run away with a whole bunch of it. Okay? That's the way it was supposed to work. If you've been keeping up with the news, you probably heard that the Chinese stock market really tanked this year. They lost $4.5 trillion. And just as a little aside, when you read financial news and all that, when you say people lost $4.5 trillion, that money didn't just go nowhere. Okay? Some of it disappeared because it didn't exist in the first place. But that comes from people selling stuff. There's a whole bunch of Chinese money that from the people who made it out first, as if it's a giant Ponzi scam, okay? We've got a big pyramid going on. The ones who got their money out first, oh yeah, that's real money. It came out of China, but you have to ask yourself, where is it going? And that's where it gets interesting. But this was the plan, and it kept working well until suddenly the Chinese stock market tanked, and the Federal Reserve is now raising interest rates, which makes the dollar worth more. So all that money you have to pay back, the dollar's worth more. You have to pay back more than you thought. So you borrow a little bit, and all of a sudden the dollar's rising in value, and you're stuck holding a loan priced in dollars, and you're holding these stupid Chinese yuan with the colorful whatever. It doesn't work out. And people are heading for the exits as rapidly as they can in China. Not just because of this reason, not just because of the $3 trillion that once floated out to China is coming home and repatriating to America. The other problem is that China is not exactly governed by the rule of law as we know it. If you made billions of dollars in China, you want to get it the hell out of China as fast as you possibly can. So that brings the question as to where is all that money going? Okay, it doesn't just disappear. It's going to be looking for a safe haven, a safe harbor, a place to invest itself. And remember, a lot of what got this all started was the idea that sooner or later the Federal Reserve was going to have to start raising interest rates. I mean, China was slowing down by itself, but the process accelerates as we raise interest rates and raise the value of the dollar. And that's where it gets kind of fun, because the Federal Reserve raising interest rates brings all that money home, and that has an effect of having a net lower interest rate because there's more money around, okay? The Fed raises rates for consumers actually go down. That's how crazy the world we're living in is, right? Because of all that, the $3 trillion or so of Chinese money coming out. But there's another really weird effect, and I want to show you this. This is balances on deposit from the Federal Reserve. Starts in 1985, and it's scaled. All these charts from the Federal Reserve, they automatically scale, so it's kind of fun. You can see it's essentially zero, and it peaks up there at what? $2.8 trillion is currently on deposit by banks that have access to the Federal Reserve. It's on deposit in the Federal Reserve. It's not being invested in anything, it's not going anywhere.
What's GDP?
GDP, sorry, the gross domestic product.
Yeah, but what is it? I just want to know what this is in relation to GDP.
Oh, about 15.7, nearly $16 trillion a year. Okay? So, $2.8 trillion is not a tremendous amount, but for the longest time, nobody put their money in the Federal Reserve. It doesn't really pay anything, right? We haven't paid any interest on this stuff for a long time. But all of a sudden, boom, 2008, a whole bunch of money got deposited in the Federal Reserve. It's looking for a safe harbor. And this is why I want to get back once again to people. I always love this exchange. It's a very famous exchange at a party between F. Scott Fitzgerald and Ernest Hemingway. You know, the rich. They're not like you and I. Yes, they have a lot more money. Actually, people with a whole lot of money are very similar to you and I. Most of us have been scared since this depression started sometime around 2000, or if you weren't scared in 2000, you certainly were by 2008. People with a tremendous amount of money are also. They don't want to lose it. They have it in their heads that you're supposed to have risk-free investment. Where is there a risk-free investment right now? What are you going to do? You stuff it into the Federal Reserve, and you just let it sit there if you have access to it. See, traditionally, there are two types of money. Capital, that's invested with the prospect of getting a return, or ordinary income, or expenses, as you might call it. money that's spent on a day-by-day basis to buy useful things like beer. Those are the two types of money that exist. But now we've kind of developed a third kind of money, idle money. At least $2.8 trillion of it are deposited with the Federal Reserve, doing nothing. The financial world is full of idle money, not going anywhere. People who own it want to preserve it. For every trader like Martin Shkreli and somebody like that, there are a bunch of other people who are a little bit older like me who want to preserve it. They don't want to see it get lost. And that's kind of the balance between the investing world right now. But what it really comes down to is, we've all heard this before, that the investment world is banks are too big to fail. I'm fond of saying something very different from too big to fail. That the system is too big to understand. These weird effects. The Federal Reserve is trying desperately to control things and raise and lower rates and all that. And it has more to do with how much money is flowing in and out of China. They can't control it. The system's too big to understand. But what I think it really comes down to is the system's just too big. A system like this, where everything flows back and forth across national boundaries, cannot be controlled by anybody, and it cannot be used in a way that actually benefits anybody anymore. Basically, investors are run by either fear or greed. We have Martin Shkreli here, and we have all those deposits in the Federal Reserve. It's the sort of the bipolar nature of the market. Fear and greed. It goes back and forth. You'll see the fear and greed index on the CNN Money page. It's really interesting because they look at all kinds of market indicators and decide whether fear or greed are winning out at this time.
I don't know about you, but when you have a system that is running everything, because everything is related back to credit, and there's no resiliency left in the system, everything is done in dollars, everything goes back to its value here and there. Your worth is basically what you can produce as a person and all that. We have a system where there are two basic emotions, fear and greed. I don't think either one's any good. And that's where we have a real problem in the system. You know, I started out 2 weeks ago talking about Pope Francis and his message, which was a little different for the world. And I carry his card with his picture on it in my wallet. And it's basically this picture. And it says, "The first word that I say to you is joy. Do not be men and women of sadness." Okay? Where does joy figure into fear and greed? How do you have a happy life when everything is priced in dollars, everything is commoditized, everything is exchangeable around the world instantaneously, boom, 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 and it's subject to the whims of a market that's driven by fear and greed? It doesn't work that way. And that's the real problem with high finance as we know it. All of these other things that you might want to think about how to regulate it, how we're going to write rules that govern everything and all that. Remember that there are guys like Martin Shkreli out there. How are you going to regulate a guy like him? I don't care what law you write, he's going to figure a way around it. And he might break those laws openly at some point, go to jail. And before you get him off to jail, he's going to cause a tremendous amount of damage, even if it is completely illegal. All right? The problem is the system is simply too big. And that gets us back to the picture that I've always been using for these talks, which is a bunch of happy kids. What kind of world are they inheriting? Are we really setting up a world where they have equal access to a free market that allows them to maximize their potential and live the lives that are going to make them happy and do the things that make them happy? Right now, the world of high finance as we know it doesn't do that for three very important reasons. The US dollar absolutely rules the world. Investors aren't looking to put money into something and expect a reasonable return. They want a risk-free return out of the whole system. And there is way too much credit, way too much power, way too much control from all the banks. If this is the world you want, the system that we have right now isn't in any way set up to produce it. And we can talk all you want about useful regulation and all that, but what has to change, you say you win a revolution, you better change your mind instead. And that's kind of where I wanted to leave it, because even high finance comes down to people and their values. And I just don't see any other way around it.
We have to change our values before we change anything else. And that's the end of high finance as I know it.